timely manner. Thank you.
That's the end of the fourth session. We now proceed to the fifth debate session. It's an enhanced governance, streamlined administration. 7 policy areas are covered: rule of law, administration of justice and legal services, executive-legislative relationship, clean government, constitutional affairs, district administration, human rights, public service. Members who wish to speak in this session will please press the request to speak button. Mr. Abraham Shen.
Mr. President, I'll touch briefly on the relationship between the central government and that of HKSAR vis-à-vis how Hong Kong governance will be after 2017 or during 2017 and thereafter. 2017 marks the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the HKSAR and blessed it with the state visit by the President of our nation. The visit was not merely ceremonious in form, but rather significantly political in substance. He reiterated the continued commitment of the central government in supporting one country, two systems, and reaffirming the essence of basic law with emphasis on the principle of sovereign paramount. 中文係全面管治. This political statement leaves no room for debate regarding the role of central sovereign nation, that the one country is always over the two systems. Why is there a need for this statement at this juncture in the midst of the central government's commitment to Hong Kong for 50 years of status quo? Over the past 20 years, economically, our relationship with the mainland grows from strength to strength, as we have been riding on the back of China's growth and prosperity. But our political proximity has been drifting further and further apart to a level where they feel adjustment and guidance are necessary for a healthy development in fulfilling the duties as a SAR region. A review is called for to look into socio-political and economic aspects of the past 20 years of our cityhood development so as to guide our future growth. The present and the future CEs, in their deliberation, planning, and implementing SAR policies and governance, must take into consideration of this principle of overall jurisdiction, 全面管治. Madam President, what is the purpose and meaning of the annual CE address? Debating for 3 days meaningless because the answer is always the same. Simply, the CE is tasked with giving his or her assessment of our city's well-being with particular emphasis on the state of economic, constitutional development for the present and the future, the general welfare of its inhabitants, and the steps of good governance. Unlike the annual budget, the AFS only needs to know where the money comes from and decide on what to spend and how to spend. But the CE address, as I said earlier, is to provide a framework for his or her vision of economic growth, sharing of economic prosperity, the political development, and the improvement in the livelihood of people through measures of caring, sharing, and fairness. Madam President, having read the CE's election manifesto, one can see great promises committed for the betterment of Hong Kong. But in her maiden address, barely has she scratched the surface of these troubled volcanoes. It is realistic as the election manifesto were prepared on a two-dimensional basis of the present and the future, while the policy address is on three-dimensional basis of the present, past and future, relating that way. The past being the society debts that she inherited from her three predecessors through their errors, misguided action, mismanagement of resources, and poor governance, to say the least. Let's recap on what are these harms that Kerry has to take on board and to make good. As Shakespeare said in his Julius Caesar's play, the good that people do inter with their bones, the evil live on. And this is exactly what Kerry is carrying on. Firstly, Mr. Dong's dream of 85,000 housing supply raised the aspiration of Hong Kong people for home ownership, but failed and created confusion and disappointment. People's confidence in the government sapped. Donald Tsang's passiveness of action in the supply of lands for public and private housing further aggravate the housing problem created by Mr. Tong, but he nurtured a new monster of rising property prices when uncontrollable. The third CE, Mr. C.Y. Leung, having aware of the socio-economic problems of housing, rising property prices and livelihood issues, but he did not do anything to arrest the worsening woes. Instead, he stirred up political measures resulting in society instability, and 79 days of occupied Central and the rise of radicalism, a divided society of anger and frustration, was handed over on a silver plate to Kerry. This is the balance sheet that Kerry inherited from the three leaders during the last 20 years. Firstly, on the liability side, with the followings: a divided society of lost confidence, anger, uncontrollable rising property prices, shortage of public rental housing units with 280,000 applicants on the waiting list, wealth and poverty gap, rising education problems, lack of innovative and new industry, etc. Nevertheless, something good is on the asset side, with 2.7 trillion in exchange fund, 971 billion in fiscal fund. Credit must be given to Donald Tsang, Henry Tang, and my good friend Mr. John Tsang. The three FS have overcome the challenges of global financial tsunamis and worldwide deflationary situations, and giving Kerry a good bill of health that she could spend on giving away money. Having seen the balance sheet, it is hard to expect miracle and out-of-box thinking from Kerry's team, as they have to walk the tightrope for balancing the works of for the greater good of Hong Kong and maintaining fiscal health. Furthermore, Madam President, Kerry could hardly divorce herself from the misdeeds of her three predecessors, particularly the last two, where she was also a knight at the round table where decisions were made. With such negative baggages behind her, she did very well in presenting her maiden policy speech. She has proven herself to be a great chef, providing a housewife dish that is sumptuous, nothing extraordinary, but satisfying the hunger for fairness and harmony. The maiden policy speech of Carrie Lam must be the lengthiest ever, with 49,000 characters comprising of 251 new measures. Her giveaways generally cover all major areas, aiming to capture the mind and hearts of people after 5 years of frustration and despair. Her generosity with the 93 billion surplus cover profound tax benefit for corporation, assistance to start-up businesses, establishment fund for university hostel, injection of new fund for technological research and development, $300 for the travel subsidy, and $3.6 billion for education, or $5 billion should be. Likened to a good French cuisine, these measures are merely hors d'oeuvres and not to be mistaken as entree. These can also be viewed as political candies. Can these measures resolve the deep-rooted social, economic, and political problems of bridging the wide divide between the rich and the poor, the pressing housing problems, high property prices, and the lack of direction in leadership, weak governance? Only time will tell how effective Kerry's maiden address will be. But as established members like you and myself, we would exert our best effort to support her, irrespective of what her policy address is. We are committed to good governance of Kerry. Now I would like to speak a number of subjects which are close to my heart. Madam President, speaking on housing, paragraph 141 of the policy address states that our people most earnestly look to the current term of government to resolve with innovative solutions in a resolute manner. That said, I am afraid that the CE is steering the housing policy a step backwards with her so-called innovative solutions, particularly about building a housing leader focusing on home ownership, which is categorically misguided and contradictory per se. Since the 60s, our government have committed to providing housing for the needy for a meaningful livelihood, primarily as a safety net, Madam President. Above all, in a market economy like Hong Kong, promoting home ownership by the visible hand of government is bound to be controversial and ultimately would meet its Waterloo, its death. For home ownership is a matter of people's preference and financial capacity. The perpetual questions are why, who, and to what extent should the government assist in home ownership? And where should be the dividing line be drawn between subsidized and private housing? Admittedly, potential home purchasers find it increasingly difficult to purchase a home, and I have given the reason why. And the new CE might have high hopes for the starter home scheme to address this situation. However, even if promoting home ownership could be justified, hardly so. Why should the right of home ownership be bestowed to a privileged niche of citizens whose income just coincidentally lies within the range specified under the scheme? Potential home purchasers whose income slightly below or above the specified range may have an equally strong aspiration for home ownership. Mr. CS, is this fair? Why should they be shortchanged, those people who are above and below? At any rate, this is not justice, but an arbitrary decision falling short of fairness and causing divisiveness in the society. Any government measures must be fair to all. Furthermore, but rental housing is not fair to all. Rental housing is an affirmative action to help people that are in need. Furthermore, just because they are young and being given priority for housing, whilst the elderly who have contributed their life efforts for the prosperity of Hong Kong in the last 60 years died in vast numbers of some 44,000 yearly, waiting for the last mile that they can walk in awaiting the care and attention homes. Where is your heart, Mr. CS? You are a kind man. Think something you can do about them. Sorry. Oh, sorry. It's my daughter. Must have heard it. Admittedly, potential home. My apologies. Meanwhile, the policy shift towards focusing on home ownership is actually very perplexing, given the demand-side measures introduced since 2010 intended to suppress demand, with a view to alleviating the imbalance of supply and demand of private housing, when the supply is tight, and the new CE has reiterated that the new administration has no intention of retreating the Lajiu. It is just difficult to reconcile the administration's advocation of home ownership on one hand with suppression of demand on the other. What irony and what hypocrisy. In fact, the 4 Ds, SSD, BSD, DSD, and NRSD, are backfiring on home ownership. For one thing, the ruthless market forces have not succumbed to the government's toothless interferences, and residential prices have kept soaring, as I have predicted since 2010. The first round of demand-side management, that's the SSD launch. The price index of residential property, Madam President, is frightening. In November 2010, it was 163.7%. But in 2017, it went up to 340. And thanks to the 4 Ds, up 208%. And I'm sure, CS, but this is a great achievement. We have suppressed speculation. Oh my God, you have suppressed speculation, but you have also suppressed home ownership, particularly the second-hand properties. Let me give you some exercise. In 2010, there were yearly transactions of 120,000 of secondary flats. In 2016, it went down to 37. No need to answer. Nothing speaks better than facts. Your statistics are always lies, lies, lies. Mine are facts, facts, facts. I do not want to dwell too much on the 4 Ds, Madam. You had enough from me, because you have been so kind, allow me to filibuster that for nearly a year. But I did it for a purpose. I did it for the second home owners, that they can sell their flat and buy new flats. Who benefited from all these Ds? The government. The government just last year got $61 billion. $61 billion. You could have used that for education. Particularly, you should have used that for the elderly home care. But you didn't. You put it aside to build up the surplus. Madam President, this is unacceptable. Now, another case I'd like to talk about was still the regularization of the green farm subsidized home ownership scheme, I now call it GHS, and the interim scheme of extending the HOS secondary market to white farm buyers. The interim scheme simply makes a mockery of the CE statement that housing is not a simple commodity. My God, if this is not the way that you put it in, not a commodity, what is it? Rental housing is not a commodity. HOS is not a commodity because it's not for this consumption in the market. It's for those people who are in need. Those are subsidized flats. So for what the CE is going to do is the other way around, by making more subsidized housing becoming a commodity, irrespective of the fact that prices of public housing estates and HOS flats have kept breaking records to over $10,000 per square foot. Regularizing GHS and the interim scheme is adding fuel to the fire. Don't play with fire. I am extremely glad that the CE have retracted a statement on the 80,000 public housing units limit, harnessing the commitment of LTHS of 280,000 applicants on the waiting list and the waiting period of 3 years. CS, you have a common saying that 今屆政府 there is no such thing as 今屆政府 or last 上屆政府. When a government makes commitment under the long-term strategy, making a commitment to PAC in its report of 61 and 63 that you will keep the LTHS for ensuring that 280,000 in the units in the 10 years that you will fulfill that. Make sure this government as you said, remember what the former government did promise. This we will be watching, particularly I'm still in PAC. It will be on my clearance sheet until you do it, you know. Mr. President, many eyebrows, thank you, were raised. When the new CE, I've done that already. Huh? Now, if I may move what, while no one knows what the CE has on her sleeve, I'm surely she is a kind lady, and kind lady have nothing to hide. But I don't know the others. To back up her assertion, I don't know who told her. And she has soon retracted her assertion amid fierce criticism. One thing is certain, that the government is not even coming close to address the housing needs of the underprivileged. With the existing 756,000 PRH units, where there are, as I said earlier, 280,000 applicants on the waiting list for a PRH unit. And when the average waiting time, Mr. CS, this is your area, or have reduced from, have actually gone from 3 years to 4.7 years. This is also in our PAC report 61 or 63. I always remember. Huh? So GHS, the greenhouse scheme, the green Luk Ji flats are not a substitute for the public rental housing unit, as the principle of public rental housing unit is to help the underprivileged to settle in peace and contentment. It is, as I said earlier, a safety net, not a home ownership bonus. If the administration unconsciously forces the well-off tenants to purchase unconsciously a GHS flat, as they will be evicted from their PHR units, then it is downright overbearing. If purchasing a GHS flat is not mandatory among the well-off tenants, then what makes the CE so assuming that the GHS flat will be overwhelmingly popular to justify a mass production of GHS flat? The CE logic, Mr. CS, that regularizing the GHS would not affect the supply of PRH units is unconvincing, given that, in theory, the land sites for developing GHS flats could instead be used for PRH flats. The administration's only sensible option should be according priority to honor its established policy pledge on an average waiting time of 3 years for a public rental housing unit without further delay. I speak as a representative of the real estate and construction industry. I should be speaking of, wow, my God, keep the Lazio, because the developers benefited with the shortage of supply in the secondary market. This is not what they want. They want a healthy, happy environment that everybody can have a chance. They don't want favors from government. They just want a healthy market. What you are doing with the Lazio, and you haven't got the courage to look otherwise, this is bad. Madam President, innovative thinking should be encouraged, but we shouldn't innovate for the sake of it. The new CE's 5-step housing ladder is more cumbersome than the original 3-step housing ladder, consisting of PRH, HOS, and private housing in that order. There was a clear distinction between subsidized housing and private housing in the original 3-step housing ladder. Mr. CS, think about this. As my time is short, I do not want to go further down on the rental housing. I think you have enough. The URA, let me talk about the URA. The URA has become a de facto developer in recent years. It was in the days of LDC when I was CEO. But URA is different. URA has been given $10 billion. URA has been given a waiver of payment of premium. URA has been given assistance in rehousing. To do this, what you call is a people's job. But what have they done? Every time they have resumed the land, they sell at the highest rate. Mr. CS, think about this. It should be that they are there for urban renewal. They are not there as a developer, just like MTR, which I have also, Madam, declared. I'm an MTR, INED. In short, we should not really, this government, I have great faith in Kerry and in you, that we should see things that are not and ask why not. And we should not just do things that have been done and continue doing it. Do not do the things that the former, now I use the word former administration, we have a problem, fix a committee, takes 18 months, people are waiting, students are waiting to resolve their suicidal problems. Elderly are waiting to go up to their elderly home. What happened? Because there's a committee looking into them, and the committee takes on and on. Procrastination is not a solution, Mr. CS. Procrastination is just a weakness, a defense. Madam President, I'd like to talk now on education and welfare. The performance of SAR government has not lived up to the public expectation. This is a sharp yet uncomfortable contrast with the wealth possessed by the SAR government, which is accumulated to an unprecedented high level, $970 billion in the surplus fund. Have we invested that properly in education? The answer is meek, not no, meek. The citizens find it unacceptable for the government to rest on its laurels and to draft its mission to meet only the minimum needs of the students, the underprivileged, the socially disadvantaged, and particularly the elderly, because I am also an elderly, and thank God I do not need any handouts. I work hard and save, but other people do not have the opportunity. They need help. They need your help, yes. As if they were living in a century past against this backdrop. Whilst the government annual recurrent government expenditure rose to a record high of $80 billion, the new CE's policies address about education is, I'm afraid to use the word, disappointing. And it doesn't address any of the chronic problems such as insufficient subsidized university places for eligible students standing at 15,000 yearly. Insufficient support to non-Chinese speaking students to overcome the Chinese language barrier. The obsolete drill-based curriculum being taught in primary and secondary school. The lack of STEM-based curriculum to complement the government's new endeavors in promoting the development of R&D and IT. And the rising prevalence of students' suicide, among other issues. By avoiding these concerns intentionally or unintentionally, it makes the CE's claim to care for our young people half-hearted, and Hong Kong long-term competitiveness could be at stake because of this. Madam President, I cannot go on because I have so many pages more, but I'd like to sum up. 主席，即使咧我哋
Madam Deputy, we have spent 3 days and many hours on the debate sessions, and I thank the officials for listening to us. My conclusion is simple. This is the 18th debate that I have participated in respect of the motion of thanks. The pro-establishment camp and the opposition camp have all spoken when it comes to the vote. Most of the pro-establishment camp members will support the government, notwithstanding the lack of acceptance of their criticism on the part of the government. But I would like the government to do what they set out to do. For the opposition camp members, they will just oppose to the motion when we come to the vote. So after the conclusion of this session, their positions remain unchanged. But this motion of thanks will be carried this year. I reserve my observations to this part because I don't want the secretaries to keep to old speeches. They are not answering many questions or comments raised by members. It doesn't matter. This is the first year of the new government. Let's work together for the well-being of our people. We want to help them. They should get help. Thank you. Ms. Elizabeth Kwok. Thank you, Madam Deputy. The policy address contains 49,000 words, but there's nothing about the discipline services and the recognition of the quality service, and there's nothing on helping them solving the problems, their worries about promotional prospects, and the ways and means to review the pay structure and condition of service of discipline services. So I need to speak out for them. Our society is changing fast, and we are facing new challenges. Every discipline service is unique in its work nature. They have to face different problems. So each discipline service should be subject to a separate grade structure review. If we are to improve their morale, if we want them to work with dignity, and we want to retain the talented people of our discipline services secretary, please listen to us. There should be a grade structural review for each and every discipline service. They would like to have more quarters. The waiting time is long, and quarters is one of the important incentives to retain the officers, because property prices are high, and now the clinic service is limited to office hours. Chinese medicine is not covered. For those who are recruited after 2000, they don't have any medical service after retirement. Many discipline services are of the view that the working environment is very difficult. They would have to face foul language from the disgruntled people, even when issuing penalty tickets. According to the police, they work for 48 hours a day. It was said in 1969, and they think it should be 44 hours. After the year 2000, discipline services officers can retire at 65, but not those who are recruited at 60 rather, but not the newly recruited. There should be no discrimination. There should be consistency in the retirement age for police officers. And you are going to have body-worn cameras for police officers. There should be one for each officer, so as to calm down very heated operation environment. But it's too late. If you are only able to do this by 2021, they should expedite the process. The fire services, the department offers a valuable life-saving services. We had a major fire yesterday, and they should be ranked emergency service. And they want to have more facilities and equipment in the fire stations. Ambulance officers think that they have been ignored, and there's totally we're talking about 700,000 calls for service, but the work establishment is just 1/3 of that of firemen. They have to take delivery of material. So at least there should be an additional team for the ambulanceman grade. And the fleet of ambulances is too small to cope with the increasing need. And the fire engines is subject to a pledge of 10 minutes response time, but for ambulances for 12 minutes. Although the fire engines can arrive in 6 minutes, they may not be able to start the firefighting operation because the pump engine may arrive later, and the ambulance won't arrive in another 6 minutes.
Immigration, Deputy, we face a very complex issue. We have the bogus refugee problem. As mentioned by the Secretary for Security just now, we have some 7,000 applications in the backlog. If we have more manpower, we'll be able to vet these applications sooner. because we have so many bogus voucher claimants abusing the system. They stir up troubles, they take up illegal employment, and they commit crimes. Even after they are sent to prison, they are sent to the reception center in Qingsanwan, and then after going to prison, they may be released back in the community, and they form gangs and stir up troubles. So for the immigration department, they face huge pressure, they are lack of manpower, and they need to work for long hours. But not all of them are equipped with guns. And that is why they should be allowed to be in possession of arms and ammunition according to Section 217 and 238 of the Weapons Ordinance, so that they can better equip themselves with the necessary weapons. And the 3 BCPs will be completed soon, Liantang BCP and the Hong Kong-Zhuhai Macau Bridge BCP. I want to know whether we have sufficient manpower, because so far the department doesn't know whether there will be sufficient manpower. They wonder if they will be asked to work overtime and whether there will be deployment of manpower all over again. For Customs and Excise, Immigration, Fire Services Department, the police, etc., we need more manpower to man the BCPs. And they have no idea what is the way forward for this government. For the C&E department, after amending the Trade Descriptions Ordinance, in terms of the unscrupulous sale practices, every year we receive several thousand complaints, but it has the team size of 100. How can we take up so many complaints? Because for unscrupulous means of business, well, it's different in terms of the gathering of evidence and conducting investigation. If we are to properly tackle this problem, we need to step up manpower. Correctional Services Department, the turnover rate is the highest. They work in really remote areas. They face very huge pressure from work. At the same time, there is so much on their shoulders because they're tasked to help the inmates rehabilitate and to prevent crime being committed. They are the nameless heroes in Hong Kong, but they are being neglected. They too ask for a great structural review, and there should also be a designated space for them to take a rest. And the opposition camp is abusing the arrangement of duty visits, and there should be a review. As for the government flying service, against the wastage rate is very high because pilots turn to the private sector. It takes more than a decade to train a pilot, but they can't retain the pilots in the government service. If we cannot retain sufficient manpower in the fleet, it will be lost to Hong Kong. They also need to work under very hazardous situations. They need to take up rescue operations in South China Sea during inclement weathers. So the government should consider providing special allowances to them. Hong Kong is one of the safest cities in the world, and it all hinges on our dedicated and committed discipline services. Secretary, you have heard my speech. I hope that you will consider the requests of the various discipline services and conduct individual grade structure review for all of them. Mr. Holden Chow. Madam Deputy, this session relates to governance. The Secretary for Justice has been sparing no effort in promoting our legal services. For example, our law firms can now join hands with the mainland law firms under the CEPA arrangement, and we also strive to become an international hub for dispute resolution services, and we commend the department for its efforts. And we also have a number of reforms in the legal system. One is to introduce a class action in Hong Kong. Madam Deputy, if we take a look at the work progress, the Law Reform Commission back in 2012 prepared a detailed report on class action, and then from February to 2013 to March 2017, the working group held 17 meetings together, and the subcommittee was set up under this working group to resolve technical issues. From April 2014 to February 2017, the working group or the subcommittee held 24 meetings. I understand that the drafting work relating to class action might entail a lot of technical details. As I mentioned at the relevant panel, these are my concerns, but it's been 4 years. If we do not even have a detailed timetable, then even when the Secretary has undertaken to introduce class action in Hong Kong, it might be it might still be very fake. So I hope that the administration can explain to us as soon as possible their progress. Class action has pros and cons. The pros are that you can effectively suppress the cost of litigation for individual litigants. Imagine if individual victims file claims for the same matter, it is equally unfair for the defendant. On the other hand, if we have class action, then small claimants can take joint action in the face of well-off, powerful conglomerates. Well, we can consider all the pros and cons, and then you can also inform the public your progress on introducing class action so that we can follow up on it as soon as possible. I need to speak in English in the following.
The recent verdict handed down by the court on sentencing over the activists has actually triggered some untrue and false allegations against the court. Some people simply accuse that the court's ruling is propelled by political influence and the prosecution itself is politically motivated, which is totally untrue. The Hong Kong Bar Association and the Law Society have subsequently made a rare and joint statement to refute such groundless allegations. As a member of the legal profession, I'm sure that we all cherish the rule of law, which is the cornerstone of the city. And I'm sure that all our judges and the Department of Justice is professional, and all decisions made are done strictly in accordance with the law, but nothing else. Madam President, I do have grave concern that for people who read news abroad without proper and correct knowledge on the real circumstances here, they may actually form misunderstanding or wrongful prejudice towards our legal system. And if that sort of misunderstanding continues to exist, especially among the international communities, that would finally ruin our reputation and cause dire consequence to the city. I humbly urge the people stop blowing things out of proportion, wrongfully turning on our courts and our legal system. I know it's hard, but Madam President, I keep my fingers crossed. Thank you.
Mr. Kun Siu-ping. Madam Deputy, this debate covers 7 policy areas, and I'd just like to speak on behalf of civil servants and subsidized or subvented organizations. The civil service is the pillar of the government's operation. I support the government's initiative to increase the civil service establishment by at least 3% in order to meet demands for improved public service. However, for the 5,000 plus additional permanent posts to be created, there are issues that the government must iron out. At the moment, there is a question on whether those on non-civil service terms can be converted into permanent posts without affecting their starting salaries and the benefits. And in 2016, 12,000 such contract employees have been working for the government for more than 3 years. And it is not a small number. We hope that the government will announce the relevant recruitment policy to address the concerns of the NCSC staff. For the other 2 points, I think I've mentioned that in previous sessions of this debate on the policy address. For standard term employment contracts, there should be a stipulation of 44 hours of work per week, and for overtime work, there should be compensation in the ratio of 1.5, and the government should take the lead in this regard. For departments facing acute labor shortage, for example, for the AFCD, they have recently recruited more occupational safety and health officers. Now, for these officers, they are required to inspect over 150 sites every year, and there is obviously a shortage of manpower in this regard, and the government should understand the real situation facing frontline officers. We should avoid blowing up the establishment without replenishing sufficient frontline officers. For other public and subvented organizations, they equally serve the public diligently. And in terms of their leave arrangements and other arrangements, reference should be made to the civil service regulation. And there is also an initiative in the policy address to improve the block grant system for subvented organizations. In order to enhance the protection on frontline employees in these subvented organizations, apart from improving the lump sum grant arrangement, you should also do something about their pays and benefits. Ms. Eunice Yong. Madam Deputy, President Xi Jinping on the 1st of July came to Hong Kong to attend the ceremony of the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the Hong Kong SAR and the commencement of the 5th term of the administration. According to President Xi, we need to improve the country's and the SAR government's systems. And I think he was referring to two major constitutional duties that the government has yet to fulfill. First is to enact legislation on Article 23 and also to implement universal suffrage for the selection of the chief executive. Unfortunately, in the recently delivered policy address, the chief executive only lightly touched on these two issues. And what is more surprising is that the government actually put archive law initiative before Article 23 and Article 45, suggesting that this can enhance governance and enhance accountability of the government. But in terms of importance, constitutionally, the archives law are not on the same level as legislating for Article 23 and Article 45. The chief executive said openly that for the two pieces of legislation mentioned, they are very controversial, and the government should wait for the right time to initiate a reasonable discussion in the community. I, however, think that the chief executive should not shun these two issues. That it is necessary for the government to make public their thinking on these two matters. For example, for Article 23 legislation, the government should explain to the public that there are also similar laws in other jurisdictions, and early discussion, engaging the public at an early stage would help form mandate. And I think that we can also talk about democracy in Western countries. The essence is to have open, fair, and regularly held elections with one person, one vote. Francis Fukuyama, the scholar, in 1992 published a book called The End of History and the Last Man. At that time, he said that the Western democratic system will be the ultimate model for all governments in the world. But this scholar recently already changed his stance. He suggested that, in fact, there are some hazards relating to this Western democratic model. And, in fact, this Western democratic model has become more and more populist. And very often, the governments tend to be short-term. Macron, the French president, is one example. After he assumed office because of introducing economic reform, his popularity dropped drastically in over just 4 months. It is a zero-sum game. Whenever we have a new government and a new leader, the leader would tend to overturn what his predecessor has done.
U.S. President Donald Trump, after assuming office, announced that the U.S. will withdraw from the Paris Protocol, and also he went back on the Obama healthcare and so on. These are all examples. At the 19th Party Congress, President Xi Jinping explained his governance philosophy. He said that socialist development is to protect people's interests and realize people's will. It's for the people to take charge. And also it's about making policy decisions collectively. So that's the philosophy of President Xi's governance. It's the same as Mensch's philosophy, that is people first. And if people thrive, then the monarchy thrives. That's the core of governance philosophy for Mencius, and it has much influence in modern day Chinese development. Now, the Western democracy system may not be the best system, so different countries should have regard to their own developments and needs, and then choose the right political model. It's the case for China, it's the case for Hong Kong. I believe we should go by the basic law and have regard to their own circumstances, and then gradually and in an orderly manner we could implement universal suffrage for the election of the chief executive. Some criticize that the nominating committee is a conservative approach, but that means there will be continuity in policies. And also, if we could vote for the chief executive through one person, one vote, the transparency and accountability of the government will be substantially enhanced. Then the government will come up with true people-based policies. So I hope the chief executive will tackle the challenge faced on and complete the legislative exercise for Articles 23 and 24. That's for us to perform our constitutional duties. That way, then she could lead Hong Kong to move ahead. Now, rule of law is the most important core value of Hong Kong. Judicial independence is the cornerstone of maintaining rule of law. In the past few months, the courts of Hong Kong made rulings on individual cases, and that's attracted negative comments from different sectors. Some even questioned whether the courts have been interfered with. The basic law says that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region enjoys independent judicial power. Courts should be able to hear case and make rulings without interference. Hong Kong has always had judicial independence, and because of the independence of the judiciary, the judiciary has been given has always been endorsed. So it is regrettable that people should attack the judicial system. Now, the Secretary for Justice has pointed out many times that the public could comment on the decisions of the court, but such criticisms must not undermine the fairness and justness of such rulings. And it's been said that the law has authority because there's public trust. And if there are ungrounded criticisms, that should not undermine public confidence in the judicial system. That's very important. In recent years, people have resorted for radical or even unlawful means to express their aspirations and their dissatisfaction with the government. Now, when people choose these forms of expression, it's because the government has not been able to respond in a timely manner to their response, to their aspirations, or to explain the government's position. So the SL government and the Secretary for Justice should consider these points carefully. Now, it is we need to cherish our independent judiciary. I have every confidence in the court in exercising the judicial powers without bias, and I'm sure the SL government will also defend the rule of law. Now, I'd like to talk about the civil service. Many members mentioned that in recent years, because of increasing public demands and aspirations, many policy bureau and departments have been trying hard to enhance their efficiency and improve their services through various means. And that's brought pressure to bear on the civil service. and this includes the discipline services and frontline civil servants. They are all experiencing more challenges in performing their work. On the whole, the civil service is excellent, is professional, is also corruption-free. I would like to thank the civil servants for serving us. I'm sure many in the community will join me in rallying on our civil servants. I'm glad that the government has taken on board the demands of the New People Party. That is for civil grades, or they could choose to, for serving civil servants, they could choose to retire at 65. For discipline services, serving officers could choose to retire at 60s. And I hope the government will also review the terms and remuneration of non-civil service contract staff. The government should also return them into permanent staff. We've also asked for the provision of dental services, Chinese medicine service, for civil service medical care. I hope that the government will respond positively to these demands. Thank you. Mr. Alvin Young. Thank you, Madam Deputy. In her first policy address, Carrie Lam did show that she has the new style of governance on the district administration, governance, and so on. We can see that in C.Y. Leung's policy address, there were just a few paragraphs. For example, in 2015, there were about 10 paragraphs in C.Y. Leung's policy address on governance. But then by 2016, there's just 6 paragraphs. And then in the first policy address of Carrie Lam, there are 28 paragraphs on good governance, some 5,800 characters, covering 23 subjects. It covers executive legislature relationship, basic law, roles of the chief executive, and so on. So it's touched on all aspects. It shows that the CE is committed to a new style of governance. But then, of course, whether there are more characters devoted to good governance, does it mean then the CE actually attaches more importance to good governance? Well, that may not necessarily be the case. In the policy address, you can see the style of the CE is a strong governance, and so there are just various measures to enhance governance. For example, setting up the civil service training school, restructuring the central policy unit, increasing the size of the civil service, and so on. I can't say that these are petty measures, because some of the reforms are rather substantial, but then they all share a common feature. That is, if there are policies that touch on core issue values or important political subjects, then Carrie Lam's proposal becomes very conservative or even irrelevant. Now there is a confidence crisis in the government on the whole, so this policy address is not able to do anything about that. On reform of rule of law and so on, in paragraph 19, it stated that rule of law is the most important core value of Hong Kong. So she said a lot about the rule of law system, how independent it is, how we must cherish it, and so on. But then what are the actual actions taken to defend that? Well, the answer is that for area number 5 site, so just 2 new sites for building the a new High Court building and so on. This is to address the overcrowding of courts buildings. Well, as a member of the legal profession, of course, I welcome such measures. But what about improving people's confidence in rule of law? The SF government could do a lot, obviously, and that's far more important than building new court buildings. For example, stopping the implementation of co-location at the West Kowloon terminus, or there should not be any abuse of the judicial system to prosecute political prisoners. And we must reiterate the separation of free powers rather than collaboration of free powers. These are measures to restore confidence, but would Carrie Lam do it? And then on constitutional development, there's nothing worth mentioning. There are no new ideas at all. Then the CE has no intention to go beyond the August 31st framework to relaunch a constitutional reform, and that's really the very crux of any social conflicts. Now, you said yourself yesterday, Madam Deputy, that the chief executive is supposed to defend one country, two systems, but she has not explained her ideas clearly, and rarely do I agree with you. But in this case, I do. Now, in the 19th Party Congress report, President Xi Jinping announced that the CPG has a firm control of jurisdiction over Hong Kong. Under the circumstance, what plans does the chief executive have to defend one country, two systems, or uphold one country, two systems? Would she be upholding the two systems or the full jurisdiction of the CPG? Now, I've read this policy address, and I have this strong feeling that our C is more and more becoming like a mayor. And I'm not the only person saying that. Tian Fei Long, as a mainland scholar, also explained that what full jurisdiction means. That he said it's about formalizing jurisdiction of CPG in Hong Kong. It's about a division of labor and collaboration between the CPG and the Hong Kong SRG. It's also about realizing direct jurisdiction of CPG over Hong Kong under the Basic Law. And he further pointed out that the liaison's office used to just exercise informal influence over Hong Kong, and instead it should now assume a formal role. So if liaison office becomes formal, assumes a formal role in Hong Kong, initially people will resent it, but this is only normal. So 10 years ago, the CPG wanted to turn the liaison office into the second ruling team. It's now become a fact. The Western District and the Central share the responsibilities in ruling Hong Kong. The Western District takes care of political matters, and the Central District takes care of other matters. So Tan Film believes that when there's formalization of liaison office role, Hong Kong will slowly come to accept this concept, and he believes this is entirely in line with one country, two systems. Now, if Tan Fei Lung's ideas represent the central people's government's views, or at least some in the CPG's views, then the chief executive have to clarify whether that's the case. Would the liaison office become a formal part of the day-to-day governance structure of the SARG? On important political issues, could the C still say no to the CPG? Now, whether it's the co-location, national anthem, or Ben Rogers case, and the lack of vetting power over the single single entry permits and so on, how much more could Hong Kong put up with the CPG? How much room is there left of high degree of autonomy? Now, the promise of one country, two systems, high degree of autonomy is now being distorted. Now, the Pan-Democrats are appointed by, elected by the people to represent them. So we should stand up to all these problems. We have the duty to force the government to go back on the right track. The CE expressed a sense of helplessness with the current executive and legislature relationship. But you have to first ensure there will be no further distortion of a high degree of autonomy. Now, for any responsible government, it derives its powers from the people. And when there are resources, the resources should be invested in the people, into the people, to improve their livelihood. That's what any government should do. But don't think that because you have done so, then you could regain the confidence of the public as a result of distortion of rule of a common country, two systems. Now, the government.
匹夫不苦，莫不有司。是以
Now we have to. We must not just give more favors to the people and then think we can be a good government, because then we just leads to riots. Now, we are talking about Asian wisdom here. If you try to use favors and you give people favors, of course this is what the government should do, but if you just give people favors without good governance, then it's not going to work. And at the end, the governance will fail. So for the officials here, I hope you understand that that's really the crux of the problem. We have deep-seated conflicts in Hong Kong. This cannot be addressed just by plowing in more resources. Hong Kong people are now wise and intelligent. They won't just accept your small favors, but without they won't accept injustice in the system. At the end, then the problems will just remain.
主席。
Madam Deputy, I hope Mrs. Carrie Lam and the principal officials will understand this. Whether we're talking about governance, the governance of Hong Kong, we cannot just try to bribe people through goodies. Otherwise, there will be chaos in Hong Kong. Ms. Claudia Mo, the theme of this session is enhanced governance, or streamline governance, or streamline administration. The word streamline in the business sector means downsizing or laying off people. You are using this word in a way that the mainlanders would use. You should just say improve governance or administration. I want to point out the three major faults of Mrs. Carrie Lam. She once said that as someone who doesn't want to get more, she is a bold official. And now she's a very senior official indeed, and she has lost all courage. And she can only act meekly in the face of demands from and directives from the mainland. When we talk about the admission of a UK national, the most you could do should be to prevent him from visiting the jail activists. But now it was escalated into a diplomatic incident. Would Carrie Lam say no to the demand and order from Beijing? No. But she's very bold when it's something about Hong Kong people. Well, she claimed to sell a cap on PRH at 800,000, and it was not even discussed at the Exco. But that's very characteristic of Chinese politics. And that officials are all very off-putting when they are dealing with their people. And I now turn to the disqualification of LegCo members. She claimed to have nothing to do with this. Do you trust him? Trust her? No. There's no proper governance without trust from people. And now Hong Kong is in a mess because you have no principle. Is the social rift related to Mrs. Carrie Lam? Of course, it is related to her. And she said she wants to mend the rift. Well, I would thank her for not making the situation worse. Now that we are going to have the legislation on national anthem. She said it must be done immediately. She wants to teach the football fans a lesson. She wants to solve the problem for the CPG. It's the way things are done on the mainland, where the plaintiff can easily become the accused. And last night, the soccer fans shouted, "We are Hong Kong," when the national anthem was played. And now you want to divide Hong Kong right in the middle. And it's sad. That when you hear the national anthem, you should stand solemnly. How can you have such a piece of legislation requesting that unless you specify the occasion and the circumstances concerned? You cannot just tell us that we have to do it and do it quickly. This is the new governance style of Mrs. Carrie Lam, and also ceding our land for co-location. Is he going to learn from what Mr. Martin Lee has said? This is a serious impact on our one country, two system and our autonomy, and also the undermining of human rights protection. She would say that no, it's the practice of CCP. Well, when she faces our people, she would give us a very bad deal. But when faced with orders from Beijing, she wouldn't dare to say anything but to give way. Well, when we have problems, housing problems, we will be talking about land, but she will never talk about population. We have additionally 1 million people. We have fake marriages, fake permits holders. Under Article 22, we can talk to the CPG on the number of new arrivals. And Article 22 doesn't say that we are kept out of the one-way permit system. And she said, there's no justification to change the one-way permit system. And that's that. That's the decision. And she seems to think that if I say yes, then that's the final answer. Well, she thinks she has the final say. Well, actually, yes, this is the case in the policy address. And it said that Hong Kong is a densely populated city. Well, we don't have space for people, so there's no room for animal rights. And she would want to talk about looking into the concepts of caring for animals. And this is regarded as animal rights. It's not even welfare. She wants to talk about the concept of caring for animals. And of course, there's no promise to come up with new legislation. When she conducted her campaign, she said she supported bazaars, but now she's silent about this. It said it can be done in Kowloon East. We can invite tenders. The government can invite tenders. And then in a perfunctory way, this is regarded as an answer. But she's like Moses who can part the sea, divide the community. This is total nonsense. Because of the influx of new immigrants, we have a shortage of PRH units. Of course, we should allow family reunions, but we should be able to look into whether the new arrivals I hope that Mrs. Carrie Lam should pay attention to this problem. Small problems taken together can be a big problem and can bring down the government. Mr. Leung Yiu-chung. CY Leung was a pawn for Western District. As a result, the high autonomy and one-country systems were undermined, and President Xi said the CPG would now firmly hold to the overall jurisdiction of CPG. So I would like to advise the current CE that you should not try to curry favor with the CPG. Don't be an enemy of Hong Kong people. It's most important that the CE uphold our autonomy and our rights. Mr. Martin Liu. Madam Deputy, in recent years, many people make the rule of law a battleground. And then there's the downgrading of our ranking in international surveys. We have limited time here, but I want to say something briefly about this subject. Public perception is very important for the rule of law, because justice has to be done and be seen. But if the perceptions are not grounded fairly, or if it's misguided because of political bias, we should look at the underlying causes first. According to World Economic Forum and the Fraser Institute of Canada, our competitive edge and our economic freedom have been ranked very high. But for the former, we are now ranked 53rd. And then for the latter, they expressed concern that mainland interference would affect our rule of law. The two institutions did not elaborate why. Although the individual negative assessment or ranks assessment would not affect us, but we have to clear the air for the international community. We should take the initiative to understand the reasoning that they have carried out in coming up with such assessment. And there are people who are concerned about the cases, including the activists, and because of the review, some of the accused have been given the custodian sentence, and they are absurdly, in my view, to have now called political prisoners. I just want to point out an objective fact. The judicial processes concerned are conducted fairly and openly, and is under public gaze. The accused violated the law, the provisions in the Public Order Ordinance, and they participated in the public assembly illegally. That's why they were convicted. Well, they had the right to appeal, but they chose not to. And also the application for review of sentence is only in relation to the legal errors or the manifestly lenient or over the restricted. Mr. Martin Liu, please wait. Mr. Dennis Kwok, you want to raise a point of order? Well, I think he is talking about a case being heard in the court. I want to remind him that this case is to be heard by the Court of Final Appeal. I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to interrupt Mr. Liu. I just want to remind him. I know Mr. Liu is aware of this. I thank Mr. Dennis Kwok for his reminder. I've been very careful in preparing this speech. I won't go into the contents of that case. If the public ignores that our court judicial system is fair and transparent, and if they go along with the perception that is politically biased, this would be the real risk to our rule of law. Mr. James To. Madam Deputy, maybe I should start by referring to the speech made by Mr. Martin Liu on the rule of law and the justice system.
Now, after the 19th Party Congress, members may very much subscribe to this view. According to President Xi, we have our country has moved into another era, etc., and we need to follow the new order, which is the world's new order. Now, I think if we adopt this perspective, then to call it a norm, let's consider how other countries and other jurisdictions would consider Hong Kong in respect of our rule of law, our legal system. I think it would be very dangerous to suggest that it is the other party who is biased, who is ignorant. Well, we are a free economy. We're an international city. Flow of information is rapid on a daily basis. Of course, I don't object to other members' suggestions that we need to explain in greater detail to them. But we must also bear in mind that the explanation should be constructive. For example, to take the international standard, if you say that we have political prisoners in a certain case, then in fact there are a lot of political prisoners around the world. Some may say that Liu Xiaobo is a political prisoner. And if you jump right in and said, no, not the political prisoner, just a prisoner. But what about billions of people in the world who said that Liu Xiaobo is indeed a political prisoner? He is Nobel Prize winner. Of course you can, because you are playing the tune of our country. That's the line to take. You can do that, but if, say, somebody is worried about our legal system and our rule of law, and if we respond by saying, no, you're wrong, our system is very solid, we should bear in mind at the same time the thinking of investors. You can say that it's the other people who are biased, who are ignorant. But if you want to play this game with the other parts of the world, then can we just agree with Mr. Martin Liu that we can just say, no, we have no political prisoner at all, and that will be the end of the matter? We should consider why people are saying that and consider how we can improve the situation ourselves. If even the incumbent chief executive believed that she would not have done the same had she been the chief executive a few years ago, the question is whether the chief executive would be able to untie the knot and resolve the issue. And that's the incumbent chief executive should do. Now, we talked about the three predecessors, C.H. Tung, Donald Tsang, C.Y. Leung. And these three chief executives' contributions to Hong Kong and the mess that they have left behind, together with the department secretaries, what is on the table for the incumbent chief executive? And it was a fair assessment. But the point is, what is really facing our incumbent chief executive? I've been a legislator for many years, and very rarely do we see two debates on the policy address in just a single year. And that's because of the change of hands of the government And this chief executive has advanced the delivery of the policy address. So we have 2 motion debates on the policy address. We need to consider public sentiment, what their concerns are. If you don't gauge public opinion correctly, if you don't understand public sentiment, then it will lead to dire consequences. You can say that we do offer a short honeymoon period for the chief executive, even if the chief executive has said she doesn't find any honeymoon period at all. And we also have favorable conditions. We have a huge reserve, and also, well, for the last chief executive, he could blame the last financial secretary, Donald Tsang, for not relaxing the purse strings. For this chief executive, she has a very cooperative financial secretary. But does it really solve the problem? Mr. Alvin Yeung just now said that it's wrong if you think this way, because for deep-seated issues in Hong Kong, we need to understand the public's mindset correctly. We need to understand their sentiment. Madam Deputy, we happily saw CY Leung off. I don't know whether you are happy or not. Perhaps you're upset. I don't know. I can't read your mind. But what about this chief executive? This chief executive hasn't been elected by the public. There is no public mandate. And of course, this chief executive has quite some air. And I need to remind her that it is because we have the mechanism under the basic law that she has become the chief executive under the instruction or direction of the central authorities. It's not the choice of the people, but anyway, she is now the chief executive. Now, this is a very difficult job to whoever takes it up, because she is a middleman between Hong Kong and the mainland, and we have different requests from the people of Hong Kong and the central authorities. We're now trapped in this predicament caused by CY Leung over the past 5 years. It cannot be resolved very easily. But first of all, we need to identify the issues before we could resolve them. However, in the election process, there were concerns from the community whether Carrie Lam would be CY 2.0, and Mrs. Lam rejected the idea outright. And during the election, Carrie Lam also said that she would continue with the philosophy of CY Leung. If you ask me what this philosophy is, CY Leung is combative, and he has created the monster of Hong Kong independence. And if she just blindly follows the same philosophy, then that would be the end of Carrie very soon. And I don't think she would do that. What we feel is that Carrie Lam doesn't talk back as often as CY Leung. She doesn't give the public this perception in front of TV. Of course, Carrie Lam is smarter. But we also have elected members who are supported by people who pursue democracy. And we are the watchdog of the government. We're discerning. You can put a smile on your face. You can try to be nice. But still, we consider whether she is solving the problem, or whether she even knows that she has to resolve the problems. Or at the end of the day, she finds herself unable to resolve this ultimate problem. And that is why she should focus on livelihood issues instead. And as long as people's livelihood improves, she can just hold hostage her fortune and dream that even for the political situation, it will be improved. When we consider whether Carrie Lam is CY 2.0, let's take a look at what has recently happened. We have the national anthem law discussion recently. We can consider whether it would be different if this was taken up by CY Leung instead of Carrie Lam. Well, if you ask me, of course CY Leung would not launch any public consultation at all. What about Carrie Lam? For CY Leung, I don't think he would suggest that it has any retrospective effect. But in fact, at the outset, Carrie Lam could have said that national anthem law would not have any retrospective effect, but she didn't make it very clear. She cited the Inland Revenue Ordinance and suggested that even that has the retrospective effect. She remained vague, and I couldn't help but think about what CY Leung would have done. It seems that she was not bold enough to tell us what she really thinks. What about co-location arrangement? Well, CY Leung had years of discussions behind closed doors, and then all of a sudden he just threw this proposal at Carrie Lam for her to take it up. But the problem is, if you don't even conduct a public consultation at all, albeit as short as 2 or 3 months, then I wonder why. Because she has decades of experience as an administrative officer, and this is just a such a controversial issue touching on different aspects. I wonder why no consultation has been conducted at all. The only answer I have is that perhaps she thinks that she is so competent and she just considers whether she can bulldoze everything through. Well, even if we hold public consultation for co-location arrangement for 2 or 3 months, which means that the XRL will not be commissioned on time next year, does it mean that it will be the end of Hong Kong? When you talk about public engagement, is it really the way to go? If there is public consultation, would she be more welcomed by the public at the start of her administration? Or is it that she has this mission from the central authorities such that she must bulldoze it through? On the matter of disqualifying members in this council, what would CY Leung have done? I believe that if CY Leung was still the chief executive, definitely there will not be any by-election or allow them to take part in the by-election. So at least on this point, Carrie Lam is different from CY Leung. But more can be done. In fact, all the bills, government motions can be withdrawn meanwhile in the coming months, so that the pro-establishment camp's proposal to amend the rules of procedure could be discussed and be passed in this council, because a number of members have been disqualified. Then this is a cooperation between the establishment camp and the administration. And the Legislative Council has become the NPC. So even if the Democratic camp is still able to get the majority from elections, then still our power will be undermined by 80%. And Mr. Jasper Zhang, the former chairman of your party, Madam Deputy, recently pointed out something very important in his article. He said, we have opposition camp in Hong Kong who can veto the government's motions or to act in accordance with the rules of procedure in order to block or delay government bills or government's funding applications. And this is what one country, two systems mean. Madam Deputy, of course, I don't think this is the only thing about one country, two systems. But I think that he understands the mentality of the central authorities quite well. At least he has been so for so long. And he is a communist veteran. And he was once the leader of this major political party. And he also presided in this council and handled filibustering for so long. I don't think that he is saying that to Hong Kong people only.
He's saying this at this time. I believe he's saying that to Xi Jinping. I think he's saying that to the Secretary for Justice. Because there will be change of membership for the new team overseeing Hong Kong. Are they going to act exactly the same? Or for the pro-establishment camp in this chamber, are they still just thinking that over the past 20 years, Jiang Zemin, Zheng Qinghong, and Liao Fei formulated policies over Hong Kong, so we just stay close to those policies or adhere to those policies? But what about the new team overseeing Hong Kong? Would they have the same mindset? I don't know. Anyway, it's not been long since the 19th Party Congress, so I don't know whether they've already decided on their policies over Hong Kong. Have they taken stock of the experience? Are they just going to follow past policies? Well, I still have a bit of hope. But then, of course, some political commentators say I'm too naive, but I still harbor hope. As a representative of Hong Kong people, if I do not keep up the spirit to speak for them in this council, to try to strive for maximum freedom and defend rule of law here, then why am I here? I should just go home and take care of my son. So that's why I promise my voters I will continue to speak up. But of course, there are times when we will be frustrated. Just say this past few mornings when I had breakfast at Tai Hang somewhere. I shared a table with many people. This morning I was in Tai Hang having breakfast. I came across Yao Xingmo and other members of the public. We were just chatting, and many felt really frustrated. We feel that the suppression is stifling. There are many in the middle class or not in the middle class. They all wonder what's to happen with their children. What about the children studying overseas? Should they come back? And can they take this anymore? Do they want to emigrate? Now, if the government just has this feel-good sentiment, well, there's nothing we can say. But I'm sure even for our heads of bureau, the political assistants and so on, they all have many friends. And I hope their friends will continue to speak the truth to them even after they've become officials. So they should also find out what the people think. I'm sure the heads of bureau and their assistants must have many middle-class friends. Do they really feel good? If you see them, they all look sad and glum-faced. I don't know, maybe your friends are all big businessmen. They are all thinking, okay, we're going to really strike it rich with Belt and Road, Bay Area, whatever. No, but that's what Donald Tsang used to say. But anyway, that's not the people I come across. So is this CY Leung 2.0? Now we look at appeal cases. Now she said that she didn't get to a good start with her term. That's one reason about those. It's about those appeal cases. It was not her government who took up prosecution. It was CY Leung's government. But then it was this government which decided to appeal. The Secretary for Justice disregarded the views of his professional team and decided to appeal. So then the CE would have to shoulder the consequence if she said she was off to a poor start with the term. Now, if it were CY Leung, would he have written those few paragraphs about his views on the way forward for democracy and universal suffrage? During the election, I met with Justice Wu. He was one of the candidates, and he said if he were elected, he would definitely pursue this with Beijing, because I would be the chief executive. They can't kill me. I'll just tell Beijing that Hong Kong people desperately want universal suffrage. And then maybe just Beijing would dismiss Justice Wu, tell him to come back, but he said I will go back again. So if Justice Wu became the CE, that's what he would do. Of course, he didn't become the CE, but that's the right spirit. Of course, at the end, it's not for Carrie Lam to decide whether to relaunch constitutional reform. But if you know what the deep-seated conflicts are, you know how desperate Hong Kong people are to strive for universal suffrage. Even the pro-establishment camp knows it, and as Carrie Lam said it herself too some months ago. So it's a matter of whether the chief executive will pursue this with the Beijing, that is proactively seize upon every opportunity to convey Hong Kong's aspirations for universal suffrage. Now, in the upcoming Asian event, President Xi Jinping would not meet with her alone. Fine. Maybe President Xi was afraid Carrie Lam would bring up universal suffrage with him. Probably not. But some speculate in the media the reason why the president wouldn't meet with Carrie Lam because she's been performing so poorly in the past few months, or they just putting Hong Kong one side. It's not important. Well, no, I don't think so. Or have we come to this conclusion that she's not doing enough to mend the rift, so we can write her off? No, I don't believe that's the thinking too. But as the CE, she has to convey the thinking of Hong Kong people. Or if the chief executive told President Xi, for Hong Kong, you just give them hand out goodies to them, and they'll be happy, like transport concession. There's no John Zhang to stand away, so I can spend. So don't worry, don't have to think about relaunching constitutional reform too so soon. Leave it to me. I'll just hand out goodies, and they'll be happy. I don't know if that's what Carrie Lam tells President Xi. Of course, she told us that we have to wait for the right, she has to create the right condition. What do you mean by right condition? Does it mean she has to hand out goodies for 10 months first, or when she's got a higher popularity rating, then it's the right condition? Like it's like what Dr. Donald Tsang said. He, whatever popularity, however popular Xi is, once he dabbles in the Article 23 or universal suffrage, his popularity rating will drop. Anyway, in policy address, there's mention of democracy and so on. It's a matter of where you put it. That's the difference between CY Leung and Carrie Lam. But these paragraphs are meant for Hong Kong people or for CPG? If it's for CPG, you just need to quote President Xi in the first 3 paragraphs, and that's good enough. But then shouldn't you write something for Hong Kong people? Why must she put Article 23 before democracy? And initially, the impression we gathered from the CE is that there must be legislation for Article 23 before we could have universal suffrage. So let's assume that what if then CY Leung was still the chief executive? He wouldn't put a cap on 800,000 public rental housing units. But our chief executive said this because it was on her mind, even though it's not in the policy address. And once she said it, other officials try to echo her. So it doesn't matter if you want to clarify that afterwards. Because in the interview, you stated your case clearly, why you need to cap it, and what's the advantage doing so. So you have laid out your whole case for that. It's not like you just casually mention it. And when Wang Yifei asked how she came up with the figure, she didn't answer that. But I mean, she's been a government official for so long. She's always been good with figures. She won't just quote the figure 800,000 casually. Now, she has not consulted others is one thing, but she's definitely thought it through. But then CY Leung would not have said something like that. Now, many people are worried about this authoritarian rule. And there are many things that contribute to this impression. And people are worried. Next week I'm going to ask an oral question. I will see whether the government knows exactly what's meant by a comprehensive jurisdiction. Or perhaps the central authorities haven't told them yet because the meeting is not yet over. They haven't actually summed up the policy. But anyway, it's at an important forum, the 19th Party Congress, that President Xi Jinping said that. So we have to ask about it. We have to ask the SAR government so we can learn a bit more what exactly that means. Otherwise, we'll all be living in fear. But people may say, well, but comprehensive jurisdiction, that's nothing to fear. If there's no comprehensive jurisdiction, then how can we be granted a high degree of autonomy? Well, I said if you have sovereignty, of course, you have all the powers. That's why I've asked. I had a debate with the Chief Secretary, with the Secretary for Justice about it, and asked him to write an article to explain that sovereignty, comprehensive jurisdiction, how are they different? What overrides what? But isn't it the case that as long as we have sovereignty, then the state could grant us high degree of autonomy? And why do people need to worry? Why do they need to mention all this jurisdiction? Because we have one country, two systems, high degree of autonomy. I think what people are concerned about is whether these have been undermined. Now, CY CHEUNG, when he was the CE, I think the Beijing authorities tell him you look sorted out because you're the chief executive. But was it the case with Donald Tsang, CY Leung, or Carrie Lam? Now, when CY Leung started off his term, he went to the liaison office, and then in front of Zhang Xiaoming, he said that he didn't need the help of Zhang. But then, although the C said that he didn't need help, but then liaison office secretly did a lot of things to rule over Hong Kong completely. Was that being done? Was that the case? Mr. Wang Yanlong, the former Secretary for Justice, said that the central authorities should exercise restraint in interpreting the basic law, and he thought the last interpretation could have been avoided. Well, I don't think it was a case of whether the last interpretation could have been avoided. It was CY Leung together with Zhang Xiaoming that made this interpretation possible, and that interpretation went beyond the basic law. It even touched upon the oath legislation, so it affects Hong Kong. Now, CY Leung deliberately did that when it was not necessary. Now, our Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, what would she have done in those circumstances? Would she have gone through Rimsky-Yuen to advise the CBG against it? If Wang Yanlong were the SJ, I'm sure she would do it. I think even Elsie Leung would have done it. She would urge the CBG to exercise restraint in interpreting basic law. She would probably even put forward concrete views. So our concern now is whether our chief executive would ensure our high degree of autonomy as far as possible. Mr. Dennis Kwok.
Madam Deputy, I want to talk about rule of law first and the challenges faced by the judiciary. If you have been paying attention to the discussion items for the AJLS panel, you know that the judiciary is facing some problems, mainly manpower problems. At the AJLS meetings, we have said time and again that the waiting time for cases to be heard is so long that it has failed to reach the standards of an effective judiciary and has actually failed to live up to the standards promulgated by the CFA. There's a long waiting list for cases to be heard in the High Court and in the District Court. And if you talk to a judge, many of them will say that they will have to work for 7 days a week, and some of them have to even take leave to write their judgment. Well, we have seen some progress in the past year in terms of judges' pay, especially High Court judges, and there's been an increase in housing allowance. But of course, improving remuneration is never going to be a total solution, because judges are not going to get as much as barristers in the private sector. But of course, judges are not doing their job for the sake of good income. So remuneration is not the most important issue. There's a study conducted by the judiciary to extend the retirement age from 65 to 70 for CFI and for CFA judges from 70 to 75. 65 is by no means old age. Look at Mr. Matthew Cheung. He's 65. If the judge is healthy at 65, with a wealth of experience and talent, skills, it would be a pity to ask such a judge to retire. I hope the government would approve this study's recommendation quickly, because many judges are approaching retirement age. Many of them have indicated they are willing to continue their service, because at 65, they are still very healthy. They are still very keen in serving as judges. So I hope this study should be concluded and changes introduced. We don't want to copy the Singaporean practice, because they pay their judges very handsomely. We are not saying that we should offer them very good pay in order to attract people to serve as judges. I know the government is increasing the provision of resources to the judiciary. When I talk to the judiciary administrator, every time she would say that there's enough. But we should provide more support to judges. For example, there's their clerks. There should be legal training for their clerks. I'm not talking about legal degree, but as a clerk to a judge, they should get some legal training in order to do a good job. And many young solicitors and barristers would like to become assistants to judges, what the U.S. called clerkship. The judiciary is doing this to some extent. We'd like to extend this scheme to cover CFI judges, so that the judicial assistance can be provided to CFI judges. It would be a a very good opportunity of training for young and junior lawyers. And the opportunity is also there for them to understand how the court system works. And maybe they would then consider that one day they can join the judiciary. Apart from hearing the case and writing the judgments, the court also need to do other things which should be better supported. And in this year's policy address, I'm glad to know that $20 billion will be provided to the judiciary to build new courts. We know that the High Court is very congested. It's it doesn't look like an effective High Court in the 21st century. I hope CS, please implement the projects for the two projects. Please implement the two court projects so that we can have the courts we need in the 21st century by spending the $2 billion allocated. Don't ignore such minor details. All these form the cornerstone of our judicial system. In the past year, some judgments of the judiciary were criticized. Or I have to say that I do not agree to some of them. But if you say that the judgments are poorly written or contain bias, I don't think that that's a very fair comment. I think our judiciary is still very just, and I don't believe stories such as the CPG officials will call a judge to get something done. I don't believe it. But when people are disappointed at the judiciary, well, it's something just to be expected. I believe the Court of Final Appeal, in respect of these important cases, will be assessing the merits of these appeals. I believe what they are going to do will restore our confidence. If we care about our justice system, I will advise you to follow the discussion of the AJLS panel. Of course, it's important that the judiciary is able to operate independently. Equally important is that we should have a talent pool in the legal professions. If we don't have a world-class system of legal professionals, then the rule of law and the rule of and a quality judicial system will be illusionary. We are one of the best in the world because our legal professions are open, coming from all over the world, the Australia, the UK, the US. You find all these good lawyers coming from different jurisdictions in Hong Kong. Our legal services are definitely the best in Asia and definitely better than Singapore. And compared with the mainland, our legal professionals are much better. But it's not enough just to talk about how good it is. Mr. Yun, the Secretary for Justice, should find more ways to create job opportunities for young solicitors and young barristers. I have been involved in facilitating young lawyers to learn about competition law in other jurisdictions, together through a joint program with the Competition Commission. I hope the DOJ, the Secretary for Justice, will offer similar for the Department of Justice Council. so that our lawyers can broaden their horizon to new areas of legal work. On arbitration, I know the Secretary for Justice and the Department of Justice have been very eager to catch up, to do some catching up in the past few years. When we have a bill on arbitration-related issues, we always get the bill passed as quickly as we can. We have four meetings of the Bills Committee on third-party funding. Within 4 meetings, we endorsed the bill, and the bill was then passed by the full Council. And there are other bills related to the dispute resolution, such as the apology bill and the arbitration in respect of IP rights. They were passed into law very quickly. So, if the government is doing something good for Hong Kong, something good for our rule of law, members of this council will always scrutinize a bill in a positive way so as to expeditiously pass them into law. So, please take a clear look, because sometimes this council is said to be ineffective. I hope the Secretary for Justice can devote more resources to publicize our arbitration services. Mr. Edward Yao was here, but he's not here now. I hope, because if you don't do more promotion, you affect the legal professions and also the rule of law indirectly. In the long run, we should develop our legal professions so that there are quality opportunities for advancement. There are some opportunities related to arbitration. There are other areas of work, such as financial services or matters, professional services for AIIB-related initiatives. I hope Mr. Nip Tak Kun and Mr. Edward Yao would do more to promote this. Apart from arbitration, there are other areas of concern. For example, class action. The Secretary for Justice would agree with me that this is not an easy task. When we talk about different classes of shares to be allowed for our listed companies, that has to do with the class action system. So, and I miss out one particular aspect of arbitration, and that is a contingency fee and the consultation on that. It should not be very controversial. I hope the Secretary can proceed with it immediately, so that the development of arbitration in Hong Kong will not be lagging behind other jurisdictions. In this year's policy address, it's proposed that the legal aid department will come under the CS office. I have proposed this for a long time. And the Legal Aid Council has made a similar suggestion. Now the government has promised to put the Legal Aid Department under the Chief Secretary's office. The work of the LAD is very important for our rule of law. If the Legal Aid Department cannot make sure that everyone is broadly equal, and then litigations are something for the rich, then it would be useless, even if the rule of law or if the judicial system is very good. If the litigants can only defend their own cases, that would undermine our rule of law significantly. we are seeing a backtracking in other jurisdictions. For example, in the UK, criminal cases used to be legally aided, but not now. We have $1 trillion in fiscal reserve, and people would think that there should be no problem for Hong Kong to do this. At least it's not a funding problem. Chief Secretary, now that legal aid department is under you, please make sure that you attach importance to the work, rationalize and streamlining the work procedure, and make sure that the department works independently, because there are many cases involved in sensitive political and social issues, and the parties may need legal aid. And there are members in this council who keep criticizing the legal aid department for bias, for granting legal aid to certain cases.
I hope members of this council would read the legal aid ordinance very carefully. We do have an established mechanism. The Director of Legal Aid will not indiscriminately approve legal aid applications. If it indeed were the case, we can seek judgment from the court to see if the Director of Legal Aid is right in doing so. So we do have a mechanism. I hope that members would refrain from criticizing the very excellent, professional and diligent lawyers working in the legal aid department. Secretary, I hope that you would also speak up to protect the dignity and the independence of the legal aid department. Please do not allow other members to make groundless accusations against the legal aid department, because if you refer to the statistics, you can see that there hasn't been any abuse, and leave is often granted when after legal aid has been granted. Even if the Director of Legal Aid believes that there are merits in that case and approves legal aid, if the court believes that there are no merits, then such leave will not be granted by the court. Please do not criticize the legal aid department. We need to safeguard the work of the legal aid department because it forms a very crucial element to our legal system. Next, I'd like to talk about integrity. This issue is close to the heart of many people, including myself, and we have seen recently quite some corruption cases, and we question whether we are still a corruption-free city. But according to many foreign indices, we are gauged on whether we are a clean city. One important task is to amend the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance to extend its application to the Chief Executive. This is an undertaking clearly given by the Chief Executive during her election campaign. She has agreed to do it, but there is no timetable. I don't know why the study would take so long. Of course, the former Chief Justice Andrew Lee's IRC report has made it very clear in terms of how the POBO can be extended to cover the Chief Executive. It can be done. So, Secretary, please do not drag on your feet. I've prepared a private bill to show you that it can be done. If you're not happy with my draft, if there are other problems with my bill, then please discuss with me. Drafting a bill itself isn't a difficult task. So, Secretary, you must make sure that we can speed up the work in this regard. I think that, well, Chief Secretary, if there are legal issues that you don't understand, then Mr. Rimsky-Yun next to you would be happy to give you advice. Turning from that, I'd like to talk about ICAC. Over the years, I think that after a spate of incidents, we need to consider reforming the system, because Well, the ICAC hasn't been changed for 40 years, according to a former official, and some absolute powers were granted to the government in the past, but these are actually contravening the basic law, because it is said that the ICAC should be independent of the government's operation. The commissioner of the ICAC is to be appointed by the chief executive. We don't question that, but do we really have a mechanism to allow independent operations of the ICAC, or does the commissioner receive instructions from the chief executive and does nothing but the biddings of the chief executive? It does give abundant power to the chief executive to affect the ICAC's operation. This is also the public's perception. So if there are earthquakes within the establishment of the ICAC, with officers resigning, and also for the director of operations under the ICAC commissioner, if the post is appointed on a temporary basis, it is not a permanent position, and that has been going on for a long time. And the public does have high expectations of the ICAC. So if the director of operations of the ICAC is taken up by an officer on a temporary basis, and if the public questions the work of the ICAC, it will not be good for Hong Kong. Well, I have prepared a private member's bill, but anyway, about reforming ICAC is not mentioned in this policy address. I hope that an independent committee will be set up by the government to review the arrangement of appointing the ICAC commissioner, deputy commissioner, the tenure, the conditions of appointment, etc., to make it more independent and transparent and professional. And I think this is also the public's aspirations. Next, I'd like to turn to another point about the independence of the power of prosecution. Recently, I received a letter from the former Director of Public Prosecution. And in the letter, he said that he strongly supports the setting up of an independent prosecution unit to make independent decisions on prosecution. We understand that the basic law requires the Department of Justice to handle all matters relating to prosecution. But it doesn't mean that we cannot have an independent prosecution mechanism at all. I think independence of criminal prosecution is very important. I hope that all decisions made by the Department of Justice on criminal prosecutions can be free of any political consideration. They can be truly independent. Because if you have political consideration, no matter how you deny it, there will be questions coming from the public. It is only understandable. If in handling a case, the Department of Justice is perceived to have conflict of interest, for example, you may know the person involved and you may have dealings with the persons involved, then you should refrain from taking part in the case for the sake of conflict of interest. This will address the public's concern on the matter on the independence of the Secretary for Justice in exercising the prosecution power. So if the power is delegated to the Director of Public Prosecution or the prosecution unit within the Department of Justice, it will be better. And I think that this should be incorporated in the code of practice so that the DPP would know under what circumstances the Department of Justice should refrain from making such a decision. Now, I also like to talk about human trafficking. I have done some research in the past year, and I have also met with NGOs on this matter, and I also liaised with the U.S. government. They have a TIPS report on the issue of human trafficking, and they criticize Hong Kong for not doing enough. In a recent High Court case, the court criticized the Hong Kong government for lagging behind other countries in tackling human trafficking. It seems that the departments have no knowledge of the issue of human trafficking at all. This will tarnish Hong Kong's image. This will also attract the human trafficking ringleaders or those engaging in such activities to set up their base for operation in Hong Kong. Because our laws are so far behind. In the UK, we have the Modern Slavery Act 2015 to address the various issues stemming from human trafficking, such as money laundering, forfeiture of proceeds, measures to prevent human trafficking ringleaders from bringing in money or people into the country. They do have a basket of legislation to deal with the issue. If we does nothing to address the concerns in the TIPS report, we will become a Tier 3 country. What is meant by a Tier 3 country? We're talking about a really underdeveloped country, Rwanda, other countries, etc. And if we do not do anything to tackle human trafficking in Hong Kong, not only is it a shame, it is also our inability to fulfill international obligations. As part of the global community, we have the responsibility to join efforts with other countries in tackling human trafficking. So, Chief Secretary and Secretary for Justice, I have prepared a private member's bill on tackling human trafficking. The bill has in fact been submitted to the Chief Executive. I'm very concerned about it. You may not accept my bill, but I do hope that our government can fulfill its international obligations on tackling human trafficking. I still have a number of minutes left. I need to touch on two important issues on interpreting the law. The central authorities must exercise the strictest self-discipline, because this is not a civilized society should be doing. On the issue of interpreting the basic law, Hong Kong people are so alarmed, and they are not familiar with the process, because one must understand that interpretation of the law is, after all, an opaque process. You said that there might be consultation. We don't know how consultation is done. Sometimes members of the Basic Law Committee might make some remarks. We don't know how these remarks have come by, because as long as you exercise this power of interpretation, you will face a lot of criticisms. On the last occasion, the case was still being heard by the court, and the interpretation process already began. And there were criticisms that interpretation was not even necessary. It was a political consideration. It was a political decision. It was a safeguard just to make sure that interpretation would still be in place, even if the court handed down an unfavorable judgment. But this is exactly why interpretation is unacceptable, because you're trying to affect the decision of the court. Even if the judge had said that whether or not there was interpretation of the law, the judge would make the same ruling anyway. And that is why you must categorically tell the central authorities that interpretation of the basic law should not be invoked casually and discriminately, or it would affect one country, two systems. Next, I'd like to talk about our constitutional reform. Last term, we spent a lot of time on constitutional reform, and the proposal wasn't passed because it didn't have the backing of the public. Now, the line to take for this term is to create a favorable condition first. Creating a favorable condition is very much what I hope for, the Secretary for Mainland Constitution and Mainland Affairs to do. By creating a favorable condition, I mean that there should be a chance for pan-democrats and government officials to put their heads together and engage in a meaningful discussion. I hope that this condition can be created. Dr. Chen Xiongtai, we're in 2017. It's the 20th anniversary of the resumption of sovereignty in Hong Kong. Now, we may be moving towards the 30th anniversary, but Carrie Lam's policy address this year sets out the roadmap for the next 10 years. And at the end of her term, it will be the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong SAR.
I will look at this PA from one angle. It is actually a blueprint for Beijing's transitional strategy towards Hong Kong. And that is how Hong Kong experienced or implemented one country, two systems. At the same time, we have this pledge of no change for 50 years. We still have another 25 years. What will happen to Hong Kong in that period? Therefore, this PA cannot be regarded as one with the title of Let's Join Together for Hope and Happiness. This is not the theme of the PA. The theme of the PA is a blueprint for Beijing's strategy towards Hong Kong. Of course, it is almost silent on the most important blueprint, but that is exactly what I want to address today. If you view Hong Kong as your home, if you are really a Hong Konger, then the next 5 years could be the last period for fighting a defending war for Hong Kong. This is the theme of my speech today. Maybe you disagree. The PA is themed as we connect for hope and happiness. You see many lakes, many pairs of lakes walking around in the on the cover of the pamphlet. Of course, you don't know these people, but if you are aware of the policies, you can see this main policy, and that is they'll keep the land, they won't keep the people. This is the first clear impression the blueprint gives you. I will talk about it on 3 levels. 1, the economy. On a diversified economy, I know this session is on constitutional systems, but this is very relevant. In the part of a diversified economy, it says a few things. And this is also my introduction as well as my conclusion. It says we will make opportunities available for Hong Kong people to learn, work, and age in the Greater Bay Area. You may think that this is just any other statement in the PA, but you want to ask, why is it that the SARG is working for Hong Kong people to go to the Greater Bay Area in order to live a Hong Kong life? You should ask this question at the outset. So this is the statement made in the part on diversified economy, meaning that this is the direction for Hong Kong, and that is our future development would all be in the hands of the mainland. It says we should grasp the opportunities offered by the advocacy of the Belt and Road and also the building of the Greater Bay Area. In the past 10 years or so, you have heard about this 1-hour living circle, including Guangzhou. And now this is becoming more concrete. In other words, the Hong Kong and Macau office has also said that there is already a plan for developing Greater Bay Area, and it will be studied by the State Council, and it will be announced by the end of the year. So now you understand what this 1-hour living circle is about. Well, I may be repeating a little. In 2005, Hong Kong faced a reversing economy, but at that time you saw some clear changes as well. Beijing changed its policy on Hong Kong through economic activities. It wanted Hong Kong's economic structure to dovetail with that of the mainland. But in our eyes, it had made Hong Kong rely even more on the mainland. In 2005, we saw a downtrend in our economy, so it provided economic incentives so that the two places are drawn closely together. And in the past few years, we have said that our economy is fragile, that it is too narrow as a base. And now here in this PA, it says nothing about those. Why? Because this is a fait accompli. And what we are facing now is that for the sake of this session, the diversified economy in the PA is actually a single kind of economy. What do I mean? I might have to cite some news reports. For example, recently, after the PA was announced, Carrie Lam talked about fintech, and there were a few news reports, and I reacted to one quite strongly. Mr. Norman Chan is giving people the impression that it is now much more diligent, and he has talked about fintech, and he said a few things. Number one, Mrs. Carrie Lam met Jack Ma, and she said that Hong Kong should become a cashless society. And two, next year in September, there will be the master payment method launched by the Hong Kong MA, and in P2P transactions, whatever bank account you use, there will be a real time to pay and also receive money. But then WeChat and Alipay are not connected, but then Mr. Norman Chan said we can overcome that. And it is said that Alipay will be accepted. You may think that people might want to evade tax, or the transaction costs will be included, so taxi drivers may not stand to gain. But how come taxis are willing to accept Alipay payment? And also, Cheung Kong Limited and a mainland company will again put together an electronic wallet, and it is said that the wallet can also be used on the mainland. And this is together with Ant Financial. Professor Francis Lui has said that his friend told him that you can use Alipay to pay a beggar and also for prostitution on the mainland. This series of examples tells us that it is not just about dovetailing with the mainland financial or electronic transaction systems. If you understand Hong Kong's economy and one country, two systems, and also the international status and value of the Hong Kong dollar, we really have to be very cautious. If you understand the economy, you will understand why we need to be alert about a free market and also people's freedom. We must have our own autonomy. We are one country, two systems. What can be easily understood is how the Hong Kong dollar is used. And I may have to go into the functions of a currency. It can keep the value. It can be a computational unit. It can be for transaction. Hong Kong dollar is fully convertible. It is an internationally recognized currency. The Hong Kong dollar is the most important core system separating the mainland and Hong Kong. And this is how one country, two system is realized. It is not just the traditional Chinese script or Cantonese, the Cantonese language. But what is most important is that our market uses a different currency. I listed examples just now, and of course you see a lot of criticism against Octopus and also praising Alipay. You may say that I am exaggerating, but think about this. If in our daily lives, if there will be another virtual platform for transaction apart from Hong Kong dollar, which is pegged to the US dollar, our retail production and everything will be dovetailed with the mainland. And even if our transaction system is also dovetailed, the Hong Kong dollar can be phased out overnight. For Hong Kong people in the long term, you have to think about defending Hong Kong today. You have to defend the Hong Kong dollar. Of course, there are other considerations as well. Say, some businessmen think otherwise. The conglomerates think otherwise, talking about the Belt and Road and also developments in the future. Well, our partners of trade are in the Asia Pacific. We are included in the Asia Pacific zone. If that's the case, then if you look at the Middle Asia, Middle East, if we continue to use our currency, then international companies may have difficulty. But if it is Alipay or a virtual currency can set up another system, then Beijing or the CCP will be able to monopolize the transaction platform. If there is monopoly by mainland enterprises, Hong Kong businessmen will find it difficult to find business. So let us look at the economy. Behind a diversified economy, we are talking about 2005 to 2015. Our economic structure has become so narrow that there is no way to talk about a diversified economy. Mrs. Carrie Lam talks about financial innovation. But what is the consequence? What is the effect? It is the currency system of Hong Kong will be more dovetailed with the mainland. You may say we don't stand to lose at all, but, well, the vested interest holders must be cautious. I may come back to this point when I finish. Number 2, many pro-democracy camp members and others may be very concerned about livelihood, especially about the housing ladder and GSH. Just think back a little. 5 years ago, what were the problems for Hong Kong? Property hegemony and high property prices. Here in this policy address, you don't see any more property developer hegemony. If you ask me, was it part of the agenda for CY Leung only? Is it that it has disappeared? Of course, you know it hasn't. But why is it not present in the PA? This is exactly why I can criticize this PA. It is because this PA by Carrie Lam, well, I'm not praising her at all. She is operating a PR government, meaning that Hong Kong people can be led to concentrate on how we can save $400 in our discussion, and that we still have a dream for property ownership. But in these few years, please don't tell people they can still own property. You are telling a lie if you say that. The most important thing about housing in Hong Kong is how we can reconstruct the ladder that started with Sir MacLehose. I'm not talking about home ownership ladder, but a housing ladder. In para 144 in the PA, it is very clear that Carrie Lam is using GSH to replace PRH. And in fact, at some time when there are conditions, there will not be PRH anymore. If you don't say it, you are telling a lie. Carrie Lam had this slip of tongue. She said, by the time we have 800,000, there will be enough PRH. In other words, the government is thinking of stopping to build PRH. And she talked about GSH, regularization of the interim scheme, and also later on there could be light housing, container housing, PRH, home starters scheme, and private housing, also community housing movement. So these are the rungs of the housing ladder. But if you look at the actual figures, if according to her, we are talking about within 5 years, we need to build 75,000 PRH units so that you can satisfy the demand now, meaning about 150,000 applications. At the same time, in the next 5 years, if every year we need to build about 20,000 odd private units, meaning it has to be escalated by 70%. And this is the core of the housing ladder, saying that there are people who can't buy property, but they will be able to. And at the same time, if private developers were not happy to build so many units, it may be because they did not want to listen to the government then, but now it's no longer the case. Private developers are willing to turn out many units. But then behind this, there is a big assumption, which is that every year our economy has to rise by at least 3.5%. And given that kind of economic development, Hong Kong people must be able to hold their jobs first. What does this mean? Two residents phoned in to Carrie Lam and they said this very clearly. And in fact, Mr. Frank Chan can answer these questions. A resident asked Carrie Lam, if no company will guarantee that you will not be sacked for 10 years, 20 years, once you buy GSH or extended the interim scheme and you are fired in the interim, how can you continue to pay the mortgage payments?
And 15 years ago, he bought a flat, the first of home, and then he didn't anticipate that there were economic crisis and was fired. And now he could not apply for PRH and he had to suffer from a high rental. So this is a basic question. Has Carrie Lam or the Secretary ever thought that people would not be fired in the next 10 years? So if I buy GSH flats or start a home, I can't apply again for PRH. That means I have to suffer from high mortgage or rental in the next 10 to 20 years. Carrie Lam said that we should have confidence in the economy, but this is insulting our wisdom. We know that the global economy, the regional economy are under the threat of a bubble burst. And this is some real consideration that has to be taken on board. From the MacLehose days, where they had the public rental policy, we are actually heading towards everybody getting a house. But now, all of a sudden, Carrie Lam was saying that we should focus on home ownership instead. And the conclusion of that is that the MacLehose's housing policy has turned to the Lee Kuan Yew's housing policy. And this is a very wicked policy. And that is those who can afford it will be able to enjoy your home ownership. If not, then you have to beg for mercy from somebody else to get a place to live. And there, Joseph Yun said in May that there were financial crises in the past, two financial crises, and the next financial crisis is coming up, and Hong Kong need a bigger security safety net in face of the imminent financial crisis. Now, we don't see any mentioning of property hegemony, the wealth gap in the PA. But at the same time, you are asking people to buy their own homes. And that means that they would tell Hong Kong people, if you can't afford a home in Hong Kong, you can live in the Bay Area. You can live in the mainland. And this is very bad. This is last supper for the property developers here in Hong Kong. This is an analogy that I would like to pose. Now, there is a exuberance in the market. Does it mean that people have high expectations on new shares or what? And Carrie Lam said that she would not do anything to the property market. And she's rather proposing GSH, and she is actually telling Hong Kong people to sell their properties in the next few years. And you can choose not to believe in me and Joseph Yam, but you have to believe in Li Ka-shing. He's leaving Hong Kong, so you should trust in him. And when it comes to the question of housing, so that's it. And the last example, enhancing governance. Now, education and culture. There have been a lot of problems with the education system mentioned by others. And in terms of education,
I will not say too much. In this PA, there is no vision for our next generation because they can't imagine how the young generation should fare in the future and what kind of education system that they should be in. Now, coming back to the enhancing governance, the theme of this debate, Carrie Lam emphasized that there should be a civil service college. She would like to revive the system in the colonial days, and she would like to model after Singapore to have a civil service college. Now, on the civil service system, Carrie Lam really has strong beliefs in the civil service. In terms of public administration and governance, Carrie Lam's inclination is that in the past, we used to govern the society based on rational thinking that proves effective. But then within the present civil service team, whether we are talking about the morale and the spirit, that the old traditions seem to no longer exist. So that's why we need a civil service college, and we will invite mainland experts to teach civil servants. I have deep thoughts about this. I understand what the civil service college in the mainland is about. Well, it's just a party school, I would say. It will try to standardize the thinking of the civil servants. Now, the cost of managing civil servants is too high, so what needs to be done is to set up a civil service college so that you can monitor the political stance of civil servants. And there is one indicator which can show you clearly what she's up to. Now, if we are to set up a civil service college, well, Carrie Lam didn't mention anything about having the civil servants maintaining political neutrality. So what is this civil service college all about? Now, the different universities offering public administration courses, and the graduates of these schools will join the government. And in some circumstances, some civil servants are in fact the yellow ribbon supporters. So if they have the civil service college, then they can train up people and then try to instill into them certain thinking that the government favors or prefers. So they would be then the students from this college will be serve as political assistants and so on, and they're good looking, and then people will have the perception that this is a very good government. Now, in the colonial days, the British government adopted this kind of management philosophy, and that is the elites were drawn into the system. And Carrie Lam was further exploiting that in the PA. And then there was no strong opposition from the government because a lot of young people would like to join the civil servants in these days of turmoil in Hong Kong. So, have you thought about this? If you want to join the civil service, you want to join the disciplined services and the police, come one day, you may have to work with the new, compete with the new immigrants like Si Kwan Long, and would you have you ever thought that you would not be able to join because of this competition? For the civil service college, and then the NDS and the new immigrants, well, someday, through this college, they will become your colleagues. Now, let me sum up. Hong Kong has a private market, and the Hong Kong dollar serves to separate the mainland market and the Hong Kong market, and it strengthens Hong Kong's publicness. Second, in the McLuhan's days, we had the housing policy where everybody had a housing right. And this served to manifest that we had a citizen's right. So everybody in Hong Kong could get a PRH, but then for those new immigrants, they should have stayed here for 7 years before they could get a PRH. And then that, again, strengthens publicness. Thirdly, for our civil servants system, the civil servants should be there to serve Hong Kong people. But then if we talk about civil service college, this is something similar to the party school in the mainland. So from all these, we can see that we are fighting a war not just to strive for democracy or universal suffrage. Of course, we are also concerned about corruption. What matters most is that we should maintain one country, two systems, and we should defend our public system. Now, in the long term, this public system will disappear, and in the next 25 years, this will happen. And I have this piece of advice for the next 5 to 10 years. Well, make use of these several years' time to tread prudently and to enhance our own capability.